Right. My name is Matthew Best. I'm currently 29 years old and I'm just going to share my testimony with you today. I'll start from the beginning. Basically, I was born in 1991. My father was in the Navy at the time. I'm a twin boy, obviously. I have a twin sister. I have an older brother. He's 18 months older than me. And basically, when I was about 2 years old, my mother and father were divorced, and we lived with my dad. We grew up with my dad. He remarried a couple of years afterwards with my stepmum. We travelled around Australia as kids, spent a lot of time in the bush and in the caravan. Grew up as a Seventh-day Adventist. That's the denomination that my parents followed. When I was about 5 years old, we stopped going to church. We didn't go back until I chose to go back in my own time. I grew up with the principles of God and knowing that there was a God, and sort of had a bit of understanding around that. After we travelled around Australia and moved back, we settled in Rockingham in Western Australia, which is where I grew up and spent most of my time in primary school through to high school. My dad got a job as a long-distance truck driver, so he was away a lot of the time. He'd go away for weeks, up to a month on end, and come home, sleep for a couple of days, and then get back to work. So most of my life, although he did have a lot of an impact on my life, he wasn't there a lot of the time as well in his pursuit of providing for his family. When I was about 14 years old at high school, up until then, I'd always been a pretty good kid. I wasn't involved in drugs or alcohol. I didn't involve myself in sort of the things of the world. But at that point in my life, I guess I started to rebel a little bit. My dad and my stepmom had a child of their own when I was at this age. I think Siobhan would have been about a year old when I was 14. And I think, being honest, I felt a little bit sort of pushed out after Siobhan was born. I guess I felt like I didn't really belong in the family, and I started to rebel as a result of that. I made the decision after coming home from work one night. I was working at Red Rooster when I was 14, and I had an argument with my stepmom about my room being unclean, and ended up running out of the house, and I never returned. From that point on, I'd lived on the streets. I lived with friends. I started experimenting with drugs and alcohol, and life went pretty much downhill from there in my own pursuit of finding myself, I guess. I lost myself in a world that's easy to get lost in. At the age of 15, I was working as a roof tiler, drinking every weekend, smoking every weekend, partying every weekend. I didn't earn a lot of money. I think I was on about $8.28 an hour at that point in time. So I resorted to crime as a means to support myself and my habits and the lifestyle that I was living. I used to get involved in stealing cars and breaking into cars and houses. I've been involved in armed robberies and attempted aggravated armed robberies. I've been charged with all of the above. At the point of my 18th birthday, I was arrested. I believe it was on my 18th birthday that I was arrested for a burglary that I'd committed a few weeks previous to that. And I'd just made contact with my biological mother, who I hadn't seen since I was about 4 or 5 years old. She lived in Queensland, and I was living at my auntie's house in Narrogin at the time. And after we'd made some contact, she'd booked some flights for me to go to Queensland to meet her and her family. I had court on the 22nd of August, I believe, in 2000 and must have been 2008. 2008 or 2000, yeah, I believe it was 2008 or 2009. Anyway, in the courthouse, I was sentenced to a 12-month term of imprisonment, and just after that sentence was to be handed down, a fax came through, which was from my biological mother to the magistrate. The magistrate was reading through that email that my mum had sent, and basically the magistrate gave me the opportunity to either go ahead and serve the 12-month sentence, potentially getting out in 6 on good behaviour, or I could choose to go to Queensland and stay with my mother for a period of 6 months. Obviously, there was limitations on what I could do according to the law, but I chose that option, and the next morning, the Saturday, I flew out to Queensland and I stayed there for about 5 months. When I got to Queensland, I guess I was still dealing with a lot of the trauma and emotions of my past, and I struggled to fit in with this new family. Although they were all very nice and welcoming, I still struggled with my own sort of inner stuff that was happening. I started drinking very, very heavily, which was, I guess, was sort of a positive because I wasn't using drugs like I was in Western Australia. But it wasn't a positive because I was drinking a lot, partying a lot, and just doing a lot of stuff that I shouldn't have been doing at the time. After about 5 months, I'd had enough of being there. I couldn't fit in. I felt alienated. I felt like I was on my own. So I came back to Western Australia and started hanging out with the same crowds of people that I was hanging out previous to that, and involving myself in crime and alcohol and drugs and all of that again. When I was 19 years old, I was involved in a relationship with a girl who I'd met in high school, and I really liked this girl. I found out not long afterwards that she was cheating on me. So I was quite depressed at this stage. At this point in my life, I was taking ecstasy on a daily basis, and I was drinking a lot of alcohol. I was drinking 2 bottles of Jack Daniels a day. I was just in a really depressed state. So I reached out to one of my friends, Jason, and I told him about the position that I was in, and that I needed some help and some support from my mates. And I ended up catching up with him and one of our other mates, Dom, and there was 2 girls that were with him, Caitlin and Alana. So Alana caught my eye immediately, and I pursued her for a couple of months. We started off as very good friends, and then we developed a relationship together. At that point in my life, I was again heavily using all sorts of drugs and alcohol, and I didn't really have any direction or hope in my life. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I had no plans. I was just trying to sort of live with the pain and the trauma that I had from my past, and trying to cover that up as well as I could and be happy. So a couple of months down the track, I'd end up moving to Coolgardie to stay with my uncle in a caravan at the back of his house, and he'd hooked me up with a job for Transfield Services. And the day before I was to do the medical to start that career, I decided to go and smoke some weed at a friend's house, and as a result, I failed the medical, and I didn't get the job. So that weekend, I ended up travelling back down on the train to Perth to see Alana, because we were dating at the time and she was living in Perth. And I'd spoken to, again, my friend Jason, and we ended up moving into his apartment with his girlfriend. And that same weekend, our daughter Lily Rose was conceived. And I realised and I recognised within myself that when we found out that Alana was pregnant, that I needed to change a lot of things in my life. And I did. I stopped drinking, and I stopped doing all of the drugs that I was doing, except for pot. That was the hardest thing for me to give up. When Alana was about 5.5 months pregnant, I was charged again with an assault. And as a result of that, I was sentenced to a term of imprisonment for 7 months. The term of imprisonment was a little bit funny because the magistrate had ordered a non-parole sentence, which meant that I wasn't eligible for parole. And obviously that meant that I wouldn't be able to be there for the birth of my child or for the first 3.5 months of her life. So that sort of wore me down a little bit. And I remember on the first day that I went into prison into Hakea, I was obviously a bit scared or terrified about the situation that I'd gone and put myself in. So when I'd first gone into the prison, they put you into a single cell and they sort of monitor you and see if you're going to adapt to the prison life. And I just remember just getting on my knees and praying to God that I remembered from my childhood and saying, just saying, if you're real, if there is a God and you're real and you care about me, then help me to make the changes that I need to in my life. Not for my sake, but for my daughter's sake, and for Alana's sake as well. We all deserved a better life, and I was the way that we could achieve that. So I remember maybe after a couple of days of being in Hakea, they moved me into 2 block, which is just an older part of the jail. And I walked into they have like a kitchen sort of area where you can make toast, and they've got a fridge. And I was sitting down in that kitchen with my back to the fridge, and it was an overcast day, and I'll remember this day for the rest of my life. It was really dark, and then all of a sudden there was like a bright sunshine that came through the room, and it just filled the room up, and it was it felt supernatural to me. It didn't feel like it was just a normal sun, It felt like there was this glowing presence in the room with me. And as I've turned around, because of the light, I've seen a book on top of the fridge, and it gained my curiosity. So I've walked over to it, to the fridge, and I've pulled this book down, and it was this tattered old Bible that had been, ripped apart, and there was pages missing. And I took it back to my cell, and I just started reading it. And for days and days and days, I was just reading this Bible and reading. And I got to the part in Joel where it talks about in the latter days that the Holy Spirit will come upon all people, be poured out on all nations, and that young men will dream dreams and old men will see visions. And it wasn't long after that I was transferred from Hakea to Casuarina prison, which was a pretty big experience for me because I was classed as a minimum security prisoner, and I was expected to go to a prison farm, whereas Casuarina was the maximum security prison in the state of Western Australia. And I'd grown up with friends of my dad who were prison guards there, and heard stories about how terrifying this place was. And so I ended up going to Casuarina, but I sort of had this faith and security about me where I just knew that everything was going to be okay, and I walked in accordance to that. I remember the first night I went into 5 block in Casuarina. There was one of the guys who was in 2 block in Hakea with me. Had been there for about a week, and he approached me at dinner, and he told me that he hadn't showered for a week because he was too scared that he was going to get raped or something like that would happen to him. And I went back to my cell and I contemplated that, and I was a little bit fearful, I was worried that something like that could happen to me, but I just decided that I wasn't going to let that control me. So in Casuarina you get metal cutlery, and I took a metal butter knife into the shower with me, and I never had any issues. So my life there pretty much continued as best as it could. I think I'd purchased a diary to jot down my daily sort of experiences when I was in prison, and there was people that I was in cells with that would read that and mock me and stuff like that, because obviously of this newfound faith that I'd had. But I ended up having a dream, and it was on the 13th night, I believe, of my incarceration, that I had this dream. And I woke up in the morning to the sound of my cell door unlocking, and I just remember contemplating this dream that I had. And basically the dream was I was inside an elevator, and I was on the 96th floor, and in the elevator there was a toilet in the corner, and there was a little barred window on the side wall, which obviously represented a prison cell to me. And the elevator went down, but instead of going straight down, it went like around and around and around until it got to the bottom floor. And then when it got to the bottom floor, the doors opened, and I walked out of that elevator, and it was straight outside into just green grass and a blue sky. And these colours that I saw were so vivid. They weren't just like normal green or blue. It was just incredible, this vision that I had. And when I woke up, I immediately knew that this dream represented my life, and that I would be released from prison in 96 days. So as soon as I've got up and this sort of thoughts dropped in my head that this was going to happen, I've ran to the phone, and I've called Alana, and I've explained to her my dream and told her that I was going to get released from prison. And Alana said to me, I really don't want to burst your bubble or put any doubt in your mind, but I just want you to understand that I was in the courtroom with you when the magistrate ordered a non-parole sentence for you, which means that it's actually not possible for you to be out in the time frame that you were given. So for the next 96 days, I really struggled. I struggled with whether that dream was true or whether it was just sort of a figment of my imagination and just this hope that wasn't actually going to come to pass. So I ended up moving from Casuarina out to Rooraloo Prison Farm. That was a long way away from home. It was about 2 hours from home. And Alana, obviously, she was only 17 at the time, so she didn't have a license. She was staying with her grandparents in Golden Bay, which is a long way from the prison. She still made it up to see me as often as she could. But it was pretty challenging those few months, and I'm pretty sure it was Christmas Day in 2011 when I was called into the superintendent of the prison's office, and I was advised that I'd been granted parole, and I almost fell off my chair, even though I'd had this dream, this vision that this was going to happen. It was still so unfathomable to me that it could happen. So I asked the superintendent how this occurred, and she said basically that because the magistrate had ordered a non-parole sentence, that just changed the way that it works from being given mandatory parole to discretionary for a first-time prisoner. So obviously this was things that I wasn't aware of when I first went in. And Lily Rose was due to be born on the 7th of January in 2012. I wasn't expected to be there for her birth, and on the 10th of January 2012, which was 96 days after this dream, I was released from prison, and Lily Rose still hadn't been born yet. My brother-in-law and my twin sister picked me up from the prison, and we went down the hill and had Hungry Jack's for breakfast, and then we drove straight down to Golden Bay to Alana's grandparents' house, where I was paroled to. And when we've pulled up in the driveway, Alana's come waddling out, and she was overdue in her pregnancy at this point in time, and we embraced each other, and Alana went into labour on the driveway, and pretty much from there we went straight to the hospital. And my first night out of prison was involved in being by my wife's side as she laboured for our daughter to be born at 5:55 the following morning. And I was dad. I was fresh out of prison. Had no idea what I was doing. I had a backpack full of clothes that I'd lived out of since I was 14. I didn't even own my own shoes. I had a pair of DCs that I'd borrowed off my brother that I still haven't returned, actually. I should probably get around to doing that one day. From then, I went into a job that was paying sort of $15 an hour, and I was working 10 to 12 hours a day and travelling long distances to get to and from work, and just trying to find a job that would be able to support my family and get us into our own home instead of living at my wife's grandparents' house. After about 4 months, I ended up getting an opportunity to work for a place called Best Bar Reinforcements, and I've been there ever since. I only just recently resigned this week, but basically the foundation of my faith in God was just that He did exactly what He said He was going to do, and He showed me this dream that I was going to be released from prison in that time frame, and I was, and that put in me a trust in God that I'd never had before. I always thought that God was just there. I knew that God was real, but I didn't think that He wanted anything to do with us or had any great things planned for our lives. It was just that there was God and He was there to be feared and revered, and that was pretty much it. So from this point in time, Alana and I started going to church with Lily Rose, and that's where I really started to learn about who God actually was, and started to involve myself in the Bible and study and pray and do all those things that we're supposed to do. In the last 8.5, nearly 9 years, since then we've literally come from having nothing, and not just nothing physically and nothing monetarily, but nothing spiritually. We're coming from empty and broken people that we're trying to deal with the traumas of our past and broken homes and all of these things that so many people face in these days, as well as overcoming addictions and overcoming sort of strongholds in our lives that we've set, promises that we make for ourselves, I'll never allow this to happen, or I'll never do this, and we've, in 9 years, we went from living out of a backpack to owning our own home and, owning our cars, getting married, having another daughter, Ellie Mae. And yeah, it's just been an incredible journey, and I've had so many people come to me and say, Matt, you always say, that it's God or it's Jesus that's done this, but you changed your life and you made those decisions. And I guess my response to that would be that I never would have called out to God and I never would have asked for his help if I had the capacity to do it myself. I knew that I wanted to change, but I also knew that I didn't have the strength to make changes. I knew that I didn't have it in me to do what needed to be done, and I knew that I would fail. And I have failed many times. I've fallen down more times than I can count, but I've also gotten up more times than I've fallen down, even if it is only one more time. And God's been with me every step of the way. He has blessed me magnanimously, and the opportunities that I've been given just by asking for his help have been absolutely astounding. He's made a way where there's certainly been no way. He's been, the voice of reason in turmoil. He's been the foundation for everything that my family have built on. And without him, we truly wouldn't be here. And it would be completely and utterly ignorant of me to go through life and say that I got myself here when I know that I didn't. And I would love to be able to sit here and praise myself and glorify myself and tell you all how I overcame addiction and how I overcame all these things that held me back in life. But the utter truth of it is that it was God who overcame for me, and it was God who worked through me to get me to the point in life of where I'm at right now. And without God, I just wouldn't be here, It hasn't been easy since I made that decision to dedicate my life to God, and I've certainly failed God on more occasions than I can count. And still, in all of my failures, in every time that I've made the wrong decision, and every time that I've acted out of anger or out of the wrong place in order to do things, God's still honoured me, and he's still lifted me up, and he's still made a way for me and my family. And I hope that you can see that in my heart. I wouldn't say these things if they weren't real. I wouldn't tell you that there's hope if there's no hope. I wouldn't tell you that there's a God who loves and cares about you if there wasn't, but I've experienced these things. I've experienced and tasted God's goodness. I've experienced the blessings of God when your cup runs over, when you're so used to having nothing, and all of a sudden these things come your way and opportunities come your way just through this acknowledgement of God, would you help me? I just encourage anyone who's going through any sort of trial in their life right now, and it doesn't matter who you are, you're facing something. You're facing something in your life right now that might seem too big for you to overcome, but I assure you and I promise you that if you ask for God's help, if you ask for him to hear you and to help you, then he will. And I hope this testimony can be something that helps lead you to that place where you would just step out in faith and just ask God wherever you're at. God, would you help me? Would you make a difference in my life and show me that you're real? I think one of the biggest experiences that I've learnt is that God isn't someone or something that doesn't want to make himself known. He wants to reveal himself to you. He wants to be known by you. He wants to know you. He does know you. And if you would just get to a place in your life where you would just ask him to reveal himself, if you come to a place where you say, God, I want to know you. If you're there, I want to know you. And I want your help if you're willing to give it to me, then I promise you, with every fibre of who I am as a person, I promise you that he will honour that and he will answer your prayers and he will never ever let you down. No matter how hard it gets, or no matter where you're at or where you come to, he will never ever let you down. Since my decision to become a Christian, I guess, there's been so many things that have come against me. So many things, from terrible bosses and leaders, managers, to sicknesses and death and trauma and all sorts of things have come against me in those times. And like I said, there's many times where I've fallen down, even in trying to be good, but it's just been a picture painted of God's grace. And that's why I'm here today, just to tell you that His grace is so sufficient for you and for your circumstances right now. And I hope that this message of hope can be delivered to the hearts of those who need it. Thank you for watching anyway, and I hope you were blessed by this. And yeah, thank you. God bless.